More than 8,000 years ago, somewhere in what is now Anatolia or northern Mesopotamia, a herder stored milk inside a pouch made from the dried stomach of a young animal, most likely a goat or a sheep. When he opened it several hours later, he found not liquid, but a mass of curds floating in watery whey. Cheese was not a deliberate invention. The stomach of a young ruminant naturally contains an enzyme called rennet, which separates milk into solids and liquid. And whoever first discovered cheese probably did so by accident, while carrying milk in one of the few containers available in an age before reliable pottery. The curdled mass also lasted several days longer than fresh milk, solving a problem faced by every pastoral society: how to preserve a perishable food in climates where heat could ruin it within hours. The earliest evidence supporting this story does not come from written records, because writing did not yet exist, but from fragments of pottery found at archaeological sites in the Kujawia region of present-day Poland. The vessels were pierced with holes that archaeologists identified as cheese strainers. Chemical analysis of fatty residues trapped in the clay walls, published in 2012 by a team led by archaeologist Peter Bogucki and his colleagues, confirmed the presence of dairy fat, dating back roughly 7,000 years. These fragments are therefore the earliest known physical evidence of cheesemaking. Before that discovery, historians had to rely on much later references in Sumerian tablets and Egyptian texts, both of which describe cheese as an established food rather than a novelty. Before we go any further, a brief aside. If you enjoy stories in which an ordinary food conceals centuries of accidents, trade wars, and invisible labor, subscribing helps keep these investigations coming. Now, back to the story. The Sumerians recorded cheese on cuneiform tablets dating to around 3000 BC, listing it alongside beer and bread as part of the rations distributed to state workers. This is early evidence that cheese functioned as payment in kind long before monetary wages existed. In Egypt, tombs from the First Dynasty have yielded solid remains that modern protein analysis has identified as cheese, made from a mixture of cow's and goat's milk. In a tomb discovered at Saqqara in 2018, researchers found what they described as the oldest solid cheese residue ever analyzed through mass spectrometry. It was about 3,200 years old and, according to the same study, contaminated with a bacterium that causes brucellosis, suggesting that badly preserved cheese could already transmit serious disease in the ancient world. While these settled civilizations left behind tablets and tombs, another cheese-making tradition developed independently among the nomadic peoples of the Central Asian steppes. Mares', sheep's, and camel's milk was carried for days in leather bags hanging from saddles, subjected to constant motion and dramatic temperature changes that accelerated fermentation in ways very different from the cool caves of Europe. This tradition produced dry, exceptionally hard cheeses, such as kurut, still made today in Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. They were designed not to mature in one fixed place, but to survive months of travel without refrigeration, then be dissolved in water or hot tea when needed. This nomadic branch of cheese history, largely absent from food history centered on Europe, reminds us that the need to preserve milk arose independently in at least two very different ways of life: that of the settled herder and that of the mobile horseman. Each solved the same problem with the tools available. The Greeks attributed the invention of cheese to a gift from the gods, specifically to Aristeus, a son of Apollo. In everyday life, however, classical Greek cheese was a humble food. Homer mentions it in the Odyssey, in the scene where the Cyclops Polyphemus milks his sheep and curdles part of the milk in wicker baskets. The description of draining the curds is so precise that some food historians regard it as the earliest detailed literary account of a cheese-making technique. The Romans, who were far more systematic in recording agricultural practice, left behind an even more technical source. In the 1st century AD, Lucius Junius Moderatus Columella wrote instructions on curdling temperature, plant and animal-based rennets, and pressing methods, so specific that his agricultural treatise is still cited as the earliest complete technical manual of cheesemaking. The Roman Empire spread cheese consumption across much of Europe through its commercial and military networks. When the empire collapsed in the 5th century, much of the knowledge accumulated over centuries might have disappeared had Christian monasteries not become the main custodians of European cheesemaking during the Middle Ages. Their geographic isolation, institutional stability, and available labor created ideal conditions for preserving and refining techniques. In monasteries, long aging, washed rinds, and the controlled use of specific molds were gradually perfected. Many styles now recognized by proper names began as practical solutions devised by religious communities that needed to preserve surplus milk through long winters. At the same time that Western Europe relied heavily on Christian monasteries to preserve cheese-making knowledge, the medieval Islamic world developed a rich tradition of its own. Agricultural and culinary treatises written in Arabic between the 10th and 13th centuries described cheese production in remarkable detail. The Andalusian agronomist Ibn al-Awam, active in Seville around the 12th century, devoted several chapters of his agricultural work to different kinds of rennet, including plant-based coagulants derived from thistle and fig. These alternatives to animal rennet were especially relevant in communities whose dietary rules restricted the use of certain animal parts. The Andalusian tradition of vegetable rennet cheese survived the fall of Al-Andalus and can still be traced in Portuguese artisan cheeses such as Serra da Estrela, made with wild thistle through a method that has changed little in centuries. Roquefort is surrounded by a pastoral legend repeated in almost every tourist account of the Aveyron region of France. A young shepherd, distracted by a beautiful girl passing nearby, supposedly abandoned his lunch of bread and fresh cheese inside a damp cave in the Combelou mountain. Months later he returned, regretted wasting his meal, found the cheese covered in blue veins, and, driven by hunger, dared to taste it. As with the Neapolitan legend of Queen Margherita and pizza, no verifiable medieval document supports this story with specific names or dates. What is securely documented is that written references to cheese matured in those caves already existed by 1070. In 1411, King Charles VI of France granted the inhabitants of Roquefort-sur-Soulzon a legal monopoly over aging the cheese in their natural caves, making Roquefort one of the first food products in European history to receive formal protection from state authority. This kind of legal protection, now known as a designation of origin, spread slowly across Europe over the following centuries. It developed unevenly and was often limited to local agreements without international force. Parmigiano Reggiano followed a similar pattern. Notarial records from at least the 13th century in the Italian region of Emilia-Romagna refer explicitly to a cheese called caseus parmensis in contracts of sale. For centuries, production remained an artisanal practice governed by local guilds and monasteries. Only in the 20th century did Italy, and later the European Union, create the legal framework that now prohibits use of the name unless the cheese is produced in the designated area according to a certified traditional method. Cheddar illustrates the opposite case, a name that was not protected in time. The English village of Cheddar in Somerset has limestone caves where cheese was being aged at a stable temperature of around 7 degrees Celsius as early as the 12th century. According to royal accounts cited by British food historians, King Henry II purchased several tons of the cheese for his court in 1170. The problem facing modern producers in cheddar itself is that, unlike Roquefort or Parmigiano Reggiano, no one claimed legal ownership of the name while that was still possible. By the time British immigrants carried the technique to the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, the word cheddar had already become a generic term describing a method rather than a place of origin. Today, there is a protected European designation called West Country Farmhouse Cheddar, limited to 4 counties in southwestern England. But any factory in the world can still sell an orange block labeled cheddar without breaking the law. The same would be unthinkable for a blue cheese made outside France and sold as Roquefort. Switzerland developed a model of production different from both the French monastic system and the Italian guild tradition: the village cooperative. Beginning in the 13th century, entire alpine communities built small communal dairies, known in German as Sennereien. Farmers from the same area pooled their daily milk and took turns producing large wheels, which were later divided according to the amount of milk contributed by each family. This system allowed a shepherd with only a few cows to gain access to a matured wheel of cheese that would have been impossible to produce alone. Emmental, with its characteristic round holes, owes them not to a picturesque accident, but to a specific bacterium, Propionibacterium freudenreichii. During aging, the bacterium releases carbon dioxide inside the compact body of the cheese. When the gas becomes trapped in pockets within a sufficiently elastic paste, the familiar eyes form. For much of the 20th century, the size of those holes was used as an official quality criterion in Swiss inspections. In the 1960s, Swiss cheese authorities even investigated why some batches were developing smaller holes than expected. The mystery was eventually linked to changes in milking hygiene. Cleaner equipment left fewer microscopic hay particles in the milk, reducing the sites around which the gas bubbles could form. The real technical break with this entire artisanal tradition came in 1916, when Canadian-American businessman James L. Kraft patented a process of pasteurization and emulsification that allowed scraps and defective pieces of cheese, materials that had previously been discarded, to be melted into a homogeneous mass. The product could be stored for months without refrigeration and molded into perfectly uniform blocks or slices. Originally designed to supply the United States military during the First World War with food that could survive transport and heat without spoiling, the invention gave rise to what is now known as processed cheese. It contains real cheese among its ingredients, but in several countries it cannot legally be labeled simply as cheese without additional qualification, because both its composition and manufacturing method depart so far from the traditional definition. Several decades later, processed cheese, or something very close to it, became central to one of the strangest episodes in American food policy. By the beginning of the 1980s, the United States federal government had accumulated a surplus of more than 200,000 metric tons of cheese in refrigerated warehouses. The stockpile was the result of a dairy subsidy program that had paid producers for years to generate more milk than the market could absorb. In 1981, the Reagan administration authorized free distribution of the surplus to low-income families through welfare programs. The cheese came in orange blocks, weighing about 2 kilograms, and quickly became known as government cheese. Generations of low-income Americans remember it with a mixture of nostalgia and embarrassment, because public distribution made visible, block by block, who depended on state assistance to eat. 4 decades earlier, on the other side of the Atlantic, wartime rationing had produced the opposite effect. Not a surplus given away, but a shortage managed by the state. In 1941, during the Second World War, the British government imposed strict rationing and reduced national cheese production to a single standardized type, popularly known as government cheddar. It was manufactured according to a simplified recipe, designed to maximize the return from every available liter of milk in a country that had to feed both civilians and millions of soldiers deployed across several fronts. Hundreds of traditional British varieties, including regional cheeses that had survived centuries of local history, disappeared, because producers were forced to convert their dairies to the standardized model. Some recipes were reconstructed only decades later by artisan cheesemakers working from written descriptions, after no one remained alive who could remember the original flavor with certainty. 20th century industrialization transformed the scale of cheese production across the Western world. Manual curdling, cutting, and turning gave way to automated lines, capable of processing thousands of liters of milk per hour. Natural caves and small aging cellars were replaced by climate-controlled chambers, where temperature and humidity could be regulated electronically. By the middle of the century, the United States had become the world's largest cheese producer, building its industry on dairy farms that grew larger and more mechanized each year. Hand milking disappeared, replaced by machines capable of handling hundreds of cows per shift. This sharply reduced the number of workers required per liter of milk, but it did not eliminate the need for constant human labor, because a dairy cow must be milked 2 or 3 times a day without exception, including holidays, snowstorms, and every other circumstance imaginable. That need for labor available at all hours, under conditions few local workers are willing to accept, lies behind a fact that surprises many American consumers. According to several journalistic and academic investigations published over the past decade, including studies funded by institutions such as the University of Vermont and organizations within the agricultural sector itself, between half and as many as 70% of workers employed on American dairy farms are undocumented immigrants, most of them from Mexico and Central America. By proportion, this makes the United States dairy and cheese industry one of the sectors most dependent on unauthorized labor in the entire national food system. A major 2017 investigation by the New York Times, based on dozens of interviews with dairy workers in upstate New York and Vermont, described 12-hour shifts carried out in near total isolation on farms far from any town. Some workers avoided leaving the farm property for months because they feared immigration checks on the road. Their wages, though sometimes above the legal minimum, remained far below what most local workers would accept, given the isolation and physical demands of constant milking. The same investigation documented workers with untreated back and hand injuries who were afraid that seeking medical care might expose their immigration status to the authorities. One frequently cited example from that investigation and later reporting involved farms in Franklin County in northern New York State. Guatemalan and Mexican workers interviewed anonymously described days beginning before sunrise and continuing during busy periods late into the night, with only one day off every 2 or 3 weeks. One dairy farmer, who asked not to be identified for fear of legal consequences, admitted to reporters that without undocumented workers willing to accept such conditions, there would simply be no way to keep the farm running. The statement captured the structural contradiction at the heart of much of the American dairy industry. It depends on a labor force whose legal existence it refuses to acknowledge. In 2018, a joint investigation involving the University of Vermont and other institutions in the northeastern United States, associated with the Milk with Dignity project, also documented substandard housing on several farms. Workers were living in trailers without adequate heating during winter. The project helped create a voluntary certification system under which some dairy brands, including Ben & Jerry's, agreed to require minimum standards for housing, rest, and fair treatment from their milk suppliers in exchange for an additional payment per liter intended to benefit workers directly. The mechanism closely resembles fair trade certification programs developed in other food supply chains after similar forms of labor exploitation became public. Cheese has also been at the center of one of the best documented food fraud cases of the past decade. In 2016, An investigation by Bloomberg Businessweek, based on independently commissioned laboratory tests, revealed that several American brands of grated Parmesan, sold as 100% Parmesan, actually contained significant amounts of cellulose, an additive derived from wood pulp and commonly used to prevent clumping. In some tested products, cellulose accounted for more than 7% of the total contents, far above the legal limit in the United States, which is generally around 2 or 3%, depending on the product. That same year, Castle Cheese Incorporated, one of the companies named in the investigation, pleaded guilty in federal court to selling products fraudulently labeled as 100% Parmesan when they contained cheaper cheeses and, according to court documents, in some batches, no real Parmesan at all. The cellulose scandal was not the only battle surrounding the Parmesan name. For more than 2 decades, the Italian consortium that manages the protected designation Parmigiano Reggiano has fought legal cases in the United States, Canada, and Australia against local manufacturers selling grated cheese under the generic name Parmesan. Unlike within the European Union, the term has no protected legal status in most of those markets. A 2008 ruling by the Court of Justice of the European Union confirmed that, within Europe, even the word Parmesan by itself constitutes an unlawful evocation of the protected product. That protection stops at the European border. A block made in Wisconsin or Ontario can legally be sold as Parmesan without ever having come near Parma, while the original cheese, still made through a method that has changed little since the 13th century, competes on supermarket shelves with an imitation that borrows only its name. In response to the industrial standardization that carried cheese from the caves of Aveyron to orange blocks distributed by the American government, a new movement of artisan producers emerged in the 1980s. It began in France and soon spread to the United States. These cheesemakers sought to recover small-scale production, raw milk, and long aging periods in open opposition to the high-volume logic that had dominated the previous century. Producers such as Mary Keene, who founded Cypress Grove in Northern California in 1983, after first raising goats to provide milk for her daughters, helped build an American artisan cheese industry now worth billions of dollars a year. Even so, it still represents only a small fraction of the total volume controlled by large industrial processors. The tension between cheese made by hand in small dairies and cheese produced on automated lines dependent on invisible, underpaid labor captures much of what has happened to this food over the past 2 centuries. The same raw milk, defended by artisan producers as a guarantee of flavor and tradition, remains, more than 3,000 years after that Egyptian cheese contaminated with brucellosis, the subject of active regulatory dispute. Since 1949, the United States has required any cheese made from unpasteurized milk to be aged for at least 60 days before sale, a rule designed to reduce the risk from bacteria such as Listeria and Brucella. The European Union permits raw milk cheeses with far shorter aging periods, including fresh varieties, relying instead on different sanitary controls throughout the production chain. This regulatory disagreement explains why emblematic French cheeses, such as traditional Camembert de Normandie, made with raw milk, cannot be sold legally in their original form in the United States. It also explains why the same debate repeatedly returns on both sides of the Atlantic. How much food safety risk is acceptable in exchange for a flavor that modern industrial processing has still not fully managed to reproduce? In a sense, it is the same question faced, unknowingly, by those who ate contaminated Egyptian cheese 3,000 years ago. Returning to the anonymous herder, who, 8,000 years ago, opened an animal stomach pouch and found a mass of curds instead of liquid milk, it is remarkable to consider how far that accidental discovery has traveled. Today, it may appear as a vacuum-packed block of grated cheese in a supermarket, stamped with an expiration date and a barcode that says nothing about who milked the cow, under what labor conditions, or whether the contents truly match the promise on the label. That first herder wanted only to keep milk from spoiling before the end of the day. 8 millennia later, the question left behind by that accident remains surprisingly similar. What is really inside the food we eat? And whose visible or invisible hands made it possible?